Britain has a long history stretching back thousands of years. In every part, at some point, a bloody or mysterious event has taken place. Murders, bloodthirsty revenge, plagues, punishment and folklore will make your flesh creep in terror. This is Mysterious Britain, Tales of the Unknown. The city of Birmingham has a long history of violence and antisocial behaviour. In the latter part of 1981, the quiet residential area of Thornton Road began to suffer from an unexplainable event which bewildered the locals. Almost every night the residents of 5 houses on the east side of the street were subjected to sustained bouts of stone throwing, causing significant damage to windows and roof tiles. Initially the residents assumed it would be young vandals or neighbours harbouring a grudge, and they attempted to find the culprits. But after heated arguments with neighbours and their investigations drawing a blank, they decided to contact the police. The case at first was not taken seriously until the cost of the damage began to rise and residents demanded a more serious approach. The case was then investigated by a team led by the experienced officer, Chief Inspector Len Turley. Turley's team went to great lengths to catch the individual or individuals responsible. Officers camped outside overnight during the vicious winter of late 1981 to early 1982. The latest technology available at the time was employed: night sights, image intensifiers and automatic cameras. However, they spotted nothing but foxes, rats and rabbits. Strangely, even though the police saw nothing out of the ordinary and were closely keeping a watch, the stone throwing continued, and one stone flung even cracked the windshield of a police car. However, they were unable to obtain any evidence of the source and were left with an unexplainable mystery. By the end of 1982, the police gave up the investigation but left the case open in hope of solving it at a later date. During the time of the Thornton Road investigation, the same team had solved 5 murder cases without making any progress with the Thornton Road problem, in what should have been a simple case to solve. Some residents at the time reported seeing a ghostly figure in the streets or in the back gardens. This figure would simply stand there and stare before disappearing, and they named it the Watcher. Some have stated that this Watcher was a made-up fable and was first heard some years after the event. Some have also stated that the nature of the thrown stones matched those found within the soil of the street's gardens, but it is unclear who investigated this and how this fact was established. For the number of stones allegedly thrown, no one was seriously hurt. The worst injury recorded by the flying stones was a grazed cheek. It is unclear when or if the stone throwing ceased, and the case has never been formally solved. Police later speculated that the stones may have been launched 200 yards from the houses using a homemade catapult, but no arrests were made, and to this day the residents of Thornton Road claim to have nights of terror from the flying stones. At about 4 a.m. on the morning of the 26th of April 1871, Jane Coulson was found bleeding heavily and barely conscious in Kidbrook Lane, Eltham. A blood-stained hammer was found lying nearby, and her purse, containing 11 shillings and 4 pence, was strangely untouched, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. So badly had Jane been beaten that it was not immediately possible to identify her. Before she died, Jane allegedly named Edmund Pook as her assailant. Before her brutal murder, Jane had been working as a maid for the Pook family from Greenwich. She had been having an affair with Edmund Pook, which had lasted several months, with the result that she had become pregnant. Edmund would not marry Jane because his brother had already angered his father by marrying beneath his station, and Edmund had no intention of doing the same, so Jane was fired from the household. This claim, however, was refuted by Edmund's parents, who stated that Jane was dismissed following several warnings about her unkempt appearance and slovenly work habits. It was also claimed that Edmund and Jane had continued their relationship following her dismissal. It was said that they met secretly and corresponded romantically with one another. However, no correspondence from either Jane or Edmund could be found, and no witnesses to these secret meetings were able to be presented in court. It was also alleged that a man matching Edmund's description was seen running from the lane, that the blood-stained hammer found at the scene had been sold to him by a local shopkeeper some days earlier, that his trousers were covered in blood and mud, and that there were 7 witnesses who swore to having seen Jane and Pook together that evening. The case went to the coroner's trial first, and Edmund was found guilty of the willful murder of Jane. A full trial was then arranged at the Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey for the 10th of July 1871. During the trial, the judge ruled that all statements apparently made by Jane before her death, including naming Edmund as her assailant, were hearsay and therefore prohibited as evidence. Several other aspects of the prosecution case did not withstand interrogation, and on the 15th of July, the jury acquitted Edmund following 20 minutes of deliberation. Newspaper accounts of the time had implied Edmund's guilt even before his trial. During the final days of his trial, a large crowd had gathered in the streets outside the courtroom being packed with spectators. As his acquittal by jury was announced to the crowd waiting in the streets, the mood was one of anger and disappointment. It has been suggested that Edmund had escaped justice because of his social class and family connections. It was noted that his father, Ebenezer, had previously worked for the Times as a tradesman printer. The murder, and in particular the conduct of the police in the case, was the subject of an editorial in the Times on the 18th of July, and a parliamentary question on the 20th of July. Edmund and his family subsequently fled London, changing their identity as they continued to be hounded by the press. Edmund had been represented at the coroner's inquest into Jane's murder by Henry Pook, a solicitor not related to Edmund's family. Henry later represented Edmund Pook in 2 subsequent criminal libel suits, where Edmund was openly accused in pamphlets of being a murderer, despite his acquittal. For many years afterwards, the ghost of Jane was allegedly seen in Kidbrooke Lane, including several reported sightings by patrolling policemen. Appearing in a white dress, her face is said to be running with blood. Her cries for help were also repeatedly heard together with the last groans of her life as she lay dying. People avoided Kidbrooke Lane after dark until finally the lane was built upon and the ghost disappeared. The story of the Cold Lad of Hilton states that a stable boy named Skelton was caught courting Baron Hilton's daughter and was killed. Another version says that the Baron ordered that his horse be prepared for an important journey, but Skelton had overslept. There are several versions of what happened next. The enraged Baron was said to have either decapitated the boy, stabbed him with a nearby pitchfork, or hit him on the back of the head with a riding crop, striking a spot that had been injured and weakened the day before, causing a fatal blow. The Baron was then reported to have disposed of the body in a deep pond or an unused well. Several months later, the body was recovered. The Baron was tried for Skelton's murder but had an alibi. An old farm worker stated that the Baron had ordered the boy to remove a tool from the top shelf in a barn, and the boy had fallen, seriously wounding himself in the process. The Baron had tended to the wounds, but the boy had died. As a result of this testimony, Robert Hilton, the 13th Baron Hilton, was pardoned in 1609. Soon afterwards, strange events began to occur in the castle. The kitchen would be tidied at night if left in a mess, or messed up if left tidy. An unseen person would take hot ashes from the fire and lie on them, leaving an imprint of a body, and more grossly, chamber pots were emptied on the floor. After a while, a cook stayed up until midnight to see who was causing the mischief. He saw the ghost of a naked boy and heard him crying, "I'm cold." The cook and his wife left a warm cloak for the ghost, and the next night they heard, "Here's a cloak, here's a hood, the cold lad of Hilton will do no more good." The ghost disappeared and the strange occurrences ceased, though even now people claim to have heard the ghostly cries of the cold lad. The behaviour of the ghost suggests a poltergeist, though other versions of the tale describe the cold lad as an elf, barghast or brownie, who is under a spell from which he can only be released by being given a gift. His mischief is intended to draw attention to himself in the hope that he will be saved. He sings the following song, which indicates how long he expects to be enchanted. Woe is me, the acorn's not yet fallen from the tree. That's to grow the wood, that's to make the cradle, that will rock the baby, that's to grow to the man, that's to lay me.